on the penultimate day of COP in Dubai. So member states are still very far from reaching our climate targets, but there is a glimmer of hope because we're starting to see a dialogue beyond the traditional fossil fuel lobby and narrative. We're starting to see talk about real climate action, and part of that has to do with what we've been seeing over the past couple of years. There's conversation about health, about food, about animals, and this is what we're here to discuss today. So I would like to introduce first or share with you who's speaking on our panel we have today. So we have Cleo Verkel from the Stockholm Environment Institute and Harvard University joining us online. We have Christina Romanelli from the WHO. We have Rebecca Doyle also joining us online from the International Livestock Research Institute, and Dennis Bombard from Glycan Trust. Perfect. And so without further ado, let's move on to our speakers. We'll first begin with a presentation by Cleo based on a recent article that she wrote. And Cleo, before I give you the floor, may I ask you to kindly introduce yourself, your work, and how your work relates to what we're discussing here today?
Hi, everyone. Yes, sure. So I'm a researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute focused on food systems reform.
We can't hear you, Cleo. You're talking?
How did you disconnect?
You can't hear? You can hear. Yeah.
Food systems reform.
Oh, now we hear you. Cleo, can you please repeat?
Yeah. I can hear myself very loudly, though. Let me move here. I'm a researcher at the Stockholm Environment Institute and also at Harvard Law School. And I work on climate change governance, food systems reform. I recently co-led a report for UNEP on alternative protein. I'm kind of interested in this question of how animal welfare fits into the conversation about food system reform. Can I just check that you guys hear my audio okay now?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. Well, with that, I can start the presentation. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to speak with you all today, and I'm happy that the topic of animal welfare is perhaps slowly entering the conversation of climate change policy. I think given the fact that we are now focusing more and more on the food system at COPs, it's essential that we also focus on animal welfare, and that immediately also leads us to public health questions. And I'd like to highlight some recent work I've been doing on that area, and I'm also very interested in learning more about what others' thinking is in this space. So maybe just a bit of context, perhaps obvious, but animal welfare tends to be very much overlooked in climate change policy and has been for the past 30 plus years. If you search IPCC reports for the term animal welfare, you don't get results. And even the recent UAE declaration on sustainable agriculture, food systems, and climate action didn't mention the term. So why is it important? It's important because we are making policies around food systems, and we need to be doing that. We know that we need to make significant changes in the food system in order to reach 1.5 and 2 degree targets. And so it's a positive development that we're seeing increased attention to this issue. Some examples are the Global Methane Pledge, where many countries have pledged to reduce methane emissions. Animal agriculture is responsible for about 30% of global methane emissions. We're seeing meat and dairy companies starting to commit to different types of emissions reductions, at least some of them. And a very recent development was, of course, the FAO's roadmap on 1.5 degrees, or at least the first installment of this roadmap. And on the bottom right on my slides, you'll see some of the key milestones that the FAO has highlighted in terms of what needs to happen in order to get to 1.5 whilst ensuring zero hunger worldwide. And it's very striking. Their top sort of issues that they highlight are around the livestock system and fisheries and aquaculture. So what they're saying is by 2030, methane emissions from the livestock sector should be reduced by 25% compared to 2020. By 2050, productivity of livestock needs to have grown at 1.7% per year globally. And around fisheries and aquaculture, they want to see at least 75% growth in global sustainable aquaculture. So my colleague Jeff Sebo at NYU and I, just before COP started, wrote just a post, but with perhaps a slightly provocative title, "Will Animal Welfare Be the Sacrificial Lamb of COP28?" And what I just want to pull out here from that post, which was published on Table Debates, is this issue that it almost feels a little bit like in some ways, we are trying to treat the food systems transformation that we need in the same way as we're treating the energy transition. And in some ways, of course, these transitions are very similar. They both need to happen. We need aggressive changes in both sectors to meet climate goals. We need to take into account common but differentiated responsibilities and consumption levels, and responses need to be adapted to different regions. But a key difference is that in contrast to fossil fuels and renewable energy, some of the stakeholders in our food system are these living sentient beings that are being farmed as part of animal agriculture. And that's at least 80 billion animals, land animals a year, and many more fish as well, and other aquatic animals. We have also been working with a group of interdisciplinary authors on a paper that will be published in Frontiers in Animal Science in the next month or so. We're just dotting the I's on that, but it's already been accepted. And I wanted to highlight a few kind of key messages that are emerging from this work. So what that paper does is it looks at three common types of approaches that we are increasingly seeing to attempt to reduce emissions from animal agriculture. One of these approaches is sustainable intensification. So kind of attempting to continue to produce the same amounts, but using fewer resources and less land. Second one is species shift. For instance, shifting away from beef, but to chicken or fish consumption. And the other one is the third category of approaches we've called systemic dietary shifts, which is more shifting away from animal agriculture and towards more plant-based diets. And what we highlight in the paper is that that all of these approaches are increasingly being pursued by different governments in different ways. And you saw that the FAO is also supporting explicitly some of these approaches. So under sustainable intensification, you might see more intensive rearing and housing methods, genetic selection for productivity, which the FAO highlights, or feed changes to reduce emissions from animals, species shifts from cows to chicken and farmed fish is something we're definitely seeing. And again, the FAO highlighted this as one of their key priorities, at least an increase in aquaculture. And insect farming is also something that is gaining increased attention. And what we do in the paper is highlight not necessarily that everywhere in all cases, this will be detrimental to animal welfare and public health. I think for each sort of intervention, you need to be looking at the local context in terms of what the outcomes might be. And for instance, with something like intensification, it depends a little bit on the starting point, and maybe a bit more intensification in a very extensive system might not heavily affect animals. But overall, our assessment is that sustainable intensification approaches are associated with risks for animal welfare, including increased crowding, pressures of growth on animals, and potential metabolic and digestive disorders. And again, this will sort of depend on the type of feed, but there's definitely question marks there, and also unknowns that require more research. When it comes to species shifts, I think the key thing to highlight here is just that many more animals will be affected if we shift from, for instance, beef to chicken or fish. And this is already happening in countries like Germany, where consumers have started eating significantly less beef, but have sort of compensated that with eating chickens, and actually are eating more animals overall than they were before. And another thing to point out here is that farmed chickens as well as farmed fish tend to live particularly low welfare lives. They're farmed in very intensive conditions. And then another element that the paper looks at is the public health implications of all this. And again, context dependent, but there are increased risks in some of these systems of zoonoses emergence, especially if you're thinking about more animals being crowded together, for instance, or even, which is both the case for intensive farming, or if you're shifting from cows to chicken. So here you see how these animal welfare questions and public health issues are interlinked. We also identify potential for positive synergies between all these issues: animal welfare, public health, and climate action. And especially here in the two examples we examine, which are shifts towards more whole plant-based diets, so eating more whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, as well as investing in novel meat and dairy alternatives. So obviously, from an animal welfare perspective, you'll see fewer animals raised and killed for food in conditions that undermine their welfare, especially if we see this as a shift away from industrial animal farming. And from a public health perspective as well, here it's quite clear that there would be reduced risks of zoonoses and antimicrobial resistance. And that UN Environment Programme report I mentioned in my introduction, that was published this week and launched at COP, really does highlight that novel meat and dairy alternatives can support these public health goals. One very important aspect to mention here, of course, is that a lot of this does depend on ensuring availability and accessibility for different regions. And whilst that might be fairly easy to secure in some more high-income communities, that's not the case globally, and that obviously is a constraint on the type of transition that's possible, or at least the speed at which it's possible. Finally, just to conclude with a few policy avenues that we highlight. We think it's very important to bring animal welfare into these conversations in different ways. And because we are sort of in a UN setting now, words matter, and acknowledging different issues really matters. So recognizing the need to safeguard animal welfare in One Health in political declarations, roadmaps, commitments would be an important first step. I've highlighted here the UAE Declaration on Climate and Health, which does actually contain quite good language around One Health, recognizing the need to consider issues like antimicrobial resistance and zoonotic spillovers, human, animal, environment, and climate health challenges. So there are some positive examples already at this COP, I think, where people are starting to take this more holistic view. Generally, policymakers could conduct animal welfare impact assessments. They are very used to doing environmental impact assessments, but we need to be thinking through the impacts on animals as well. Financing decisions obviously play a huge role, both within countries and also between countries. And here too, considering animal welfare and One Health could really shift financial flows in a way that is ultimately more sustainable and healthier. And finally, just there's such a need for interdisciplinary collaboration on these topics. I say that as a researcher, just like looking at different papers on these topics, it does tend to be quite common that researchers working on the emissions reductions question side of things don't necessarily think about what public health implications could be rolling out of these interventions or what animal health implications they might have. And the same goes for different ministries and departments and agencies at the UN level as well. So that's something that that warrants a lot more consideration going forward. So thank you, and looking forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Cleo. So I guess we'll come back to the panel here. And before I let you go, Cleo, I wanted to ask. So you talked about animal welfare, and I wanted to ask, what is the difference between animal welfare and animal health?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think the answer kind of depends. Different people will probably give you a different answer, and that is also where the challenge lies, I think. So on the one hand, I think you could probably argue that if you're taking into account both an animal's physical health and their mental health, that sort of aligns quite well with this question of animal welfare. But I think in practice, there's a danger of the term animal welfare being used very narrowly, and actually, the term animal health being used very narrowly. It's 1:30 a.m. over here, so that's and we already see that in certain documents, I think also of the FAO, where they do talk about animal health, but not necessarily welfare. And we've seen in sort of the news recently as well, with avian influenza interventions where animals are that are meant to be sort of more free range or kept indoors to avoid risks of them getting avian influenza, or even like far worse, animals being suffocated or burnt alive in order to kill them, in order to reduce the risks of avian influenza transmission. So that very narrow focus on health, I think, makes it possible that policymakers and practitioners are only focusing on physical health, and physical health in a very narrow way as well. Physical health that might affect human health or other animals' health, but not necessarily, for instance, animals collapsing under their own weight, because they might still be able to produce a lot of meat even though they can't walk properly. So I think it's safer to use the term welfare because it's just more expansive, even though you could argue that a broad definition of animal health would also encompass welfare. And some people have been pushing for the term One Welfare as well, to really highlight the importance of taking both issues into account.
Thank you, Cleo. This was really good. And it was really helpful to hear your intervention. So on the one hand, we have an urgency. 30% of emissions come from agriculture. FAO has set really good targets also for livestock, 25% reduction by 2030. So there's the ambition and there are trends. Trends can go both ways. They can go towards the benefit of animals or against them. So this is where we are at a tipping point. So thank you so much for this. And so now, before we move to questions to the panelists, we have Rebecca as a panelist joining online, Christina and Dennis here. I wanted to ask the panelists to briefly introduce yourselves, your titles, and how your work links to what we're discussing here today. I think it's on. Is it on? Yeah.
Do I just jump in?
Please.
All right. So my name is Christina Romanelli. I am the Biodiversity, Climate, and Health focal point at the World Health Organization. And I think in the title itself, within the Department of Environment, Climate Change, and Health. So I think that in the title alone, right, it is a mouthful, but in the title alone, it does give an indication as to how it links into this. It's very interdisciplinary by its very nature. And I work extensively on health, including through agencies of the quadripartite organizations.
Yeah, that's incredibly exciting for us working on the intersection, so working on One Health. And I'll move to a question to you in a bit, but first I'll ask Rebecca then to introduce yourself, and then Dennis.
Thanks, Nina. So yeah, my name's Rebecca Doyle. I'm an animal welfare scientist working for ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, and I also hold a joint appointment with the University of Edinburgh. A lot of my research happens in different countries and species contexts, so I can see a lot of the nuance, I guess, that Cleo was talking about in her really fantastic presentation that highlighted the challenges and opportunities for animal welfare. And what we can see in a lot of the work we do is in smallholder contexts in Ethiopia and Uganda and Mali, for example, is that there's real benefits for One Welfare or One Health that can be made through improving the livelihoods of farmers, the livelihoods of animals at the same time.
Cool. Dennis.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. My name is Dennis Mombauer. I work as Director of Research and Knowledge Management for SLIKE and Trust, which is a non-profit think tank. We work on climate change and a number of topics related to this. SLIKE and Trust has its main office in Sri Lanka, which is where I'm based as well, and we work mostly in countries in Asia and Africa on research, policy work, entrepreneurship, and different elements. And I think the area that I want to focus on today is just transitions. I'll go into more detail on this a bit later, but that's one of our key areas of work. Just transition, not just in relation to energy, but just transition in food systems, and also just transition in the fashion sector, smart in food systems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. So now I'll move to Christina, and I'm really excited that you're here with us today because so this UAE declaration, I was in the WHO headquarters a while ago, and I kept seeing the presidency, UAE presidency, talking to the climate team. So I wonder, or I'm hoping that this was declaration on climate and health was developed in collaboration.
It was absolutely a very collaborative endeavor. Absolutely. And timely one, too.
And One Health is about collaboration, and the fact that the WHO is working on this intersectionality is very exciting for us. So there is a question, though, that we keep hearing from member states, which is, why is the WHO, whose mandate is to protect human health, working on climate and biodiversity? And if you were to give them an answer, how would you explain it? What would be the...
Do you want the diplomatic answer? Well, actually, I think it has a lot to do with what Cleo was saying earlier. You know, the way she was saying, well, we tend to have this sort of siloed view and this siloed approach. We're thinking about, in the instance of her terrific presentation, by the way, Cleo, thank you for that. We tend to look at animal health without necessarily looking at animal welfare. And in the context of human health, we often think about physical health without necessarily taking into account well-being. So I think in your just transition comments, you may actually bring part of that in. But that's been changing over time. I mean, firstly, one thing that we absolutely have to recognize is that human health and environmental ecosystem health, and within that, I, of course, bring in all components of biodiversity, so all living beings, are inextricably linked. Absolutely, we live complex systems and we are often looking for simple solutions. We tend to have these reductionist approaches, right? So systems thinking doesn't actually factor in to the policies that we develop moving forward. However, if one looks at even some of the statements that have been made by Director General Tedros, one of the things that you hear more and more is that, you know, acting on climate is acting on human health. What is surprising to me is that it took this long. It took 28 for us to actually bring health on the agenda. I think this is a terrific development now, but it's long overdue. And the other thing that we tend to do, we're here at a climate COP, and I'm often looking at the nexus. I'm a nexus thinker, so I work at the nexus of biodiversity and climate and health. And when I ask colleagues around, I mean, this is just anecdotal, but still, you know, what is it that you're doing? How are you bringing in biodiversity? They're saying, well, that's a different team. That's a different that's a different group set of colleagues. And you're saying, well, really? So how do you disentangle these different crises? Because the reality is we are in the midst of a triple planetary crisis, and these crises are not happening in isolation. What we're doing to biodiversity, what we're doing in terms of polluting the air, water, and soil has a positive feedback loop with what's happening with climate change, and has impacts on human health inevitably, right? So, but people don't tend to think about these things in this integrated way. At WHO, I think we've made tremendous amounts of inroads. You were talking to me, you were asking me about this sectoral fragmentation that we tend to have. But I mean, the One Health concept, we see it now in this declaration. This concept is not new. This concept has been around for at least, operationalized in some way or another for at least 15 years.
Yeah.
What we're seeing, however, is an expansion of that understanding of what One Health is, of what One Health means. Before, it used to be more of a human animal health, not welfare, nexus, with complete disregard for those environmental determinants, for those environmental factors that actually modulate health outcomes, health of the ecosystem, health of animals and well-being, and health and well-being of people. So, oftentimes I start presentations when I'm looking at some of the One Health concepts with biodiversity stats. We are losing, the risk of extinction of we are risking the lives of over 1 million species, right? According to the IPBES reports, the reports of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So these are in decline. 2/3 of our aquatic resources are at risk of decline. 3/4 of our terrestrial landscapes have been modified by human activity, a very large proportion of which is because of our food systems, right? So I think there are very few issues that are more emblematic of this triple planetary crisis and the need for One Health than our dysfunctional food systems. So if we look at it that way, and people are looking at it and they're saying, well, why is this person from WHO presenting us with all of these stats about biodiversity, about, and then when you look at it, 1/4, from human perspective, if we have to fragment, if we have to be reductionist about it, 1/4 of all premature deaths are attributable to preventable environmental factors. Preventable being the word,
Mhm.
right? So if we don't take that integrated approach and learn about how what is happening to our ecosystems is modulating human health outcomes, we're not actually going to be tackling the problem at source. So
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. So it means there is no other way but to follow a holistic approach. And I'm really excited about the evolution of One Health. The WHO is now collaborating with UN institutions, the Food and Agriculture Organization, UNEP, the World Organization for Animal Health.
Absolutely. But it's not now collaborating. It's been collaborating
Yes.
since 2009 through the tripartite.
Yes.
It's expanded that collaboration
Exactly.
2 years ago
To get UNEP on board.
to get UNEP.
So now environment is also part of it. And this is also related to the work that you are driving within the WHO, which is exciting.
Mhm.
And on One Health, the health definition has also expanded through the work that the WHO and the quadripartite have been supporting with the One Health High-Level Expert Panel. They've revised the definition of One Health is now more holistic. It includes well-being. It includes the scope of animal welfare. It's no longer anthropocentric. It's ecocentric. So we don't just look at how sick animals or an unhealthy environment affects humans, but also what we're doing to affect them and how that affects us in return. So this is where we're big fans. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we need that transformation.
Actually, it's not the leadership of any single entity. I really want to emphasize that. But I think that the work that is being carried out in other agencies, the FAO, the World Organization for Animal Health, the United Nations Environment Program, is equally important because we are engaging in mutual learning.
Yes.
And so yeah, I just
collaboration. It's not just about the science and ambition, it's about the collaboration.
It's a collaboration, but also understanding that collaboration is not always going to be easy. And most of the time it isn't. It's essential. And for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to attend can I
yes,
throw
please.
So for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to attend, yesterday we had the launch of the implementation guide, the quadripartite's global plan of action on joint plan of action on One Health. So we do encourage stakeholders, all of you, to maybe take a look at that and see how you can engage, because there really are entry points from different sectors and different segments of society. So even people that are working on, your work is very important to the work that's being done and going to be implemented on the ground. The work of Four Paws, of course. Anyway,
yeah,
I could go on, but
this is amazing. Thank you so much, Christina. So now we'll move to Rebecca and then to Dennis. Rebecca, my question to you is, so we talked One Health, we talked livestock, so agriculture plays a big role. And my question to you is more about livestock. So there's a growing negative focus on livestock due to animal welfare and climate concerns. Is good keeping and livestock animal production a luxury?
Thanks, Nina, for the question. So I think that I really liked, particularly out of Cleo's presentation, when she was describing that there needs to be nuance in how we're looking at reviewing systems and where interventions can be made, because I think that that's critically important. There are livestock production systems where providing good welfare to animals is restricted. And there are other situations where improving how we're keeping animals can improve their welfare, and at the same time have all of these other One Health and One Welfare benefits that we're talking about, benefits to the livelihoods of the owners, benefits to the environment from reduced wastage or reduced environmental impacts from livestock keeping. And so I think that there's all these really real benefits that come out of improving animal welfare in that scope. A couple of examples that we see from my work at ILRI, like I mentioned before, is in Ethiopia, for example, where we see animals in agroforestry production systems that have better production. They have better welfare opportunities. We have reduced mortalities in those systems as well, compared to systems that don't have agroforestry incorporated, so trees incorporated in the production system. So that's a real benefit that we see as an example of a production system. But there are still barriers that exist there. So things like health services, veterinary health services, are still something that could be improved and have those further savings and benefits. And I think that while I'm looking at this through an animal welfare lens, I can see the improvements that it has for animal behaviour. I can see the improvements and the opportunities that it has for other aspects of animal welfare, the health aspects that Cleo mentioned before as well. There are other benefits that come from the animal owners as well. So we see, obviously, there's nutritional benefits and income benefits from at a household level from having better animal welfare in those situations. But we also have animal owners describe to us in real detail and context how their lives depend on their animals and how their animals depend on them. Farmers in Ethiopia really describe animal welfare as an important two-way relationship, and they really have an important connection to their animals. So I think that this highlights to me that beyond all of the things that we're talking about from a health perspective and a climate perspective, there are these really important cultural and social and meaningful interactions at an individual level that come from livestock keeping and good animal care. And I think that that's something, those sorts of connections and two-way benefits are being missed at the moment with the types of approaches that we have from looking at things through a single lens. And again, that idea about having assessment of animal welfare within systems and these transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary projects and policy approaches will allow those sorts of additional benefits to be collected, where at the moment they're missed when you're looking at things like pure animal numbers or growth or economic outputs. There's all these other really important holistic cultural social benefits that come from good animal welfare that we're missing. And so I think that, to come back to the question, that was just an example, I think, of where there's all these other benefits that are just being missed at the moment because of the more individualized approaches. And so hearing the great stuff from the speakers today and the themes that have arisen about COP, where there's this nuance that needs to be applied, is really important, and animal welfare contributes to that.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And indeed, so it means when we take care of the animals, we're also taking care of the communities. And when we're looking at the issues outside of the silos and a collaborative approach, we also see co-benefits. So it's a necessary way of working. Thank you so much for your excellent work at ILRI. We always look to you and to the projects that you're doing with communities. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And last but not least, I wanted to come to you, Dennis. So Cleo talked about different trends. One of them was also the dietary shift. Your think tank is based in a developing country. So the developing country perspective is also a lot about food security. It's about the just transition. It's about livelihoods. How topics fit with dietary shift from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will build on what the other presenters have already said, because I think there were a lot of really good points and things that I would have mentioned as well if I had to, but there's no need now. So I think it was already very nicely outlined why there is a need to transform food systems, why is a transition for different reasons, in terms of climate mitigation, of emission reduction, also, of course, in terms of animal welfare. So I want to focus a bit on the human aspect of the transition and what that means for those who are in food systems, who are having their livelihoods in food systems. Because there is this mitigation side and there's also an adaptation side of the transition that is important to look at. And we can look at specifically livestock. There are many things to consider when it comes to this. Often in the countries we work in, which are in Asia, which are in Africa, like Sri Lanka, Ghana, Uganda, Niger, these different countries, it is having livestock is kind of a livelihood, but also a risk diversification, a risk management strategy, because it kind of balances some of the risks that farmers are facing. It also exposes them often to additional risks. For example, in disaster situations, often having livestock can become a liability. It can lead to failure to evacuate. It can lead to a lot of human health impact as well. So what we are looking at and what we are trying to work at is to facilitate this transition towards more plant-based food production, and especially working with small-scale farmers, with entrepreneurs in these countries, who look at mainly three aspects. So one is how to deal with climate risks and how to facilitate like secure livelihoods and to for this kind of protection. Then to develop the necessary capacities and skills and the knowledge to make a shift, and then also to have the resources and the access that is needed to shift towards plant-based food production. And of course, there's already a lot of plant-based food production going on. People know how to grow vegetables, people know how to grow rice, etc. But we also we try to look at these things like alternative proteins. What are the different protein sources that can be produced that are maybe not utilized? Looking at mushrooms, looking at different kinds of alternative proteins, looking all that things, because we work on just transition, not just in food systems, but also in fashion, like plant-based leather and kind of these alternatives that are there to animal production. And a lot of the benefits that people get from animal production, they can be generated in the same way if they have the ability to focus on these plant-based alternatives. So we have this initiative called Ethical X, which is about sustainable, ethical, and climate-friendly entrepreneurship. And under this, we are setting up these climate and innovation hubs. So we work on the national level with the policymakers to try to create this enabling environment with things like certification schemes and accreditation schemes that allow users to have these the vegan labels, plant-based labels, and to be able to also access export markets, which is often difficult for them, especially if they're small scale. But we also have these hubs on the local level. Because often what we see in many countries, there are some of these accelerators, these incubators, the entrepreneurship support programs, they're in the capital or they're focused on the national level. But in many of the rural areas that we work in, for example, with farming communities, these are not available. They don't have the access to the mentorship, to the support, to the technology, to the information that they would need to do this shift, and also to more effectively produce plant-based food and manage these risks that are associated with climate change. Both the sudden, the extreme events, but also the long-term risks that are there when it comes to soil degradation, to salinization, to the degradation of ecosystems. So we think that is something that is very important to really highlight, that there is this aspect of looking at animal welfare and also at human welfare and the livelihoods that are associated with animals. So if there's a transition, we need to make sure that people are taking with this transition, so they're not stuck in if we divest from livestock and animal production and into plant-based diets, that those who are involved in these production systems, that they're not left behind, so that there's a way to keep them and take them with us through skill development and through offering these kind of incentive schemes, these accreditation certification schemes, these support programs and seed funding and all these different kinds that are there. And just also the access to the skill development. So the hubs are there to bring the experts into the rural areas and allow the access for these people to get the training that they need, to get the resources, to have the ability to shift. And in Sri Lanka, for example, and also in some of the other countries, they're doing the research to identify the native plant-based protein sources that are there and where they can be cultivated and what is the potential on the economic side. So we can directly present like the numbers in the case farmer or entrepreneur who wants to invest in it and say these are like this is what you put answers or to produce this. This is where you can sell it. This is like this is how you get the accreditation. This is how you document your supply chain. You manage the financial aspects, the records, the reporting, and all these things. How it connects to also the national processes. So, for example, the NDCs, most all NDCs have food systems as a key sector. National adaptation plans, 100% have food systems as a key sector. Are commitments that are there on the climate side that connect to what people are doing on the ground, but they don't know about it, and even the local government often doesn't know about it because these plans are not localized yet. That is an important aspect to connect this. So we work with the local government as well on the, so like for example, on the divisional level, the district level, to see what kind of knowledge they have on this, what they're reporting upwards, and what they're getting from the national level as a kind of information, and how this connects to the mostly for outside the climate community, but also SDGs, of course, and all the other global things like the Sendai framework and the different processes in there. And I think maybe with that, I will stop. Very happy to have a further conversation on this. And we do have our Knowledge Hub, a lot of knowledge products that outline the different case studies and the different aspects of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. So make sure to check SLICAN, the think tank. Oh, I was told we have a little bit more time. And what we heard was the case we saw the policy trends that we can embrace. Policy trends can either go for animal welfare or against. We saw some encouraging leadership from the quadripartite institutions collaborating on One Health, focusing on biodiversity and climate, also from the health perspective. We heard about the livestock, so better keeping conditions for animals, the just transition, also diets. And now, so before we close, I was hoping to ask our panelists one question. So if you were to give advice to policymakers, so yes, I know. So maybe we can highlight what you're telling them here. So they're going to leave COP with the Climate and Health Declaration. We have a food declaration. If you want to give them one piece of advice, so dear policymakers, after you leave COP, please make sure to. And I don't know who would be ready first. Stina?
I'm always ready to give advice. I don't know if one piece of advice
You
would
give
be sufficient.
all the advice you want to give in the time that we have.
All right. So I would say be ambitious, be bold. We know what we need to do. We know what needs to be done. Now we need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to finance these initiatives. We need to finance interdisciplinarity, cross-sectoriality. We need to engage different levels and layers of governance. Remember that things are actually happening from the ground up and not the other way around. So I think that speaks to
Dennis,
what Dennis was saying. And we need to engage with different sectors, as Cleo and Rebecca were saying. Let's be bold, let's be ambitious, let's be coherent, and let's empower. I think we need to empower at every level of governance.
beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Great. So I'll move to Cleo, then Dennis, then Rebecca.
From my perspective, I'll answer a slightly different question, which is I think that we as a community who are sort of aware of these issues, I think we've heard here that there are so many valuable synergies between human health, between animal welfare, and between environmental action. And thank you also for bringing in biodiversity, because I think that's a really important part of the conversation as well. And I feel like that is not really translating into policy. And I actually feel like the FAO's roadmap is an example of where we really risk potentially going in the wrong direction, where, okay, we might reduce emissions somewhat, but at what cost? And I think there is a tendency in policy, not just related to the food system, but everywhere, and definitely in climate policy, to try and do as much business as usual and not to disrupt existing systems. And that simply isn't possible anymore. And so I think just for people in this room, I really encourage everyone to talk to your policymakers, to make them aware, because I think the science is really strong here. The arguments are strong. The Climate and Health Declaration is a really valuable starting point. And the fact that this One Health is gaining more attention within the UN system and has also sort of recognized explicitly the importance of animal welfare. But I think we can't just sit back and relax now. The real hard work is beginning around this topic.
Thank you so much, Cleo. And indeed, on the urgency and the ambition, this is what you need. So Dennis.
Yeah, I can just support what the others have said. Ambition is a key aspect. The synergy is a holistic part of it. I think what we really need to, what I would like to policymakers understand that climate change is not primarily an environmental crisis. It's like a socio-economic, a human crisis and challenge, and needs to be addressed in that way also. So we need to look at at what people are doing, how people are involved in it, and how to make these connections vertical, horizontal, between different silos, between different sectors, and see what are the who are the stakeholders in this? How are they acting, and how are they incentivized? How are they? What are their factors that are forcing them to act the way that they act, and what are the constraints? What are their challenges to address these in a evidence-based way? And there's a lot of evidence out there. There's a lot of information out there. A lot of people working on these, but often it's not really coming together. So I think to look at these different aspects, try to bring it together, to cooperate and work in partnership between different stakeholders and stakeholder groups and different levels would be maybe my key message.
Amazing. Thank you, Dennis. And last but not least, Rebecca.
Thanks, Nina. So my kind of take-home point for policy is that good animal welfare improves the lives of animals, the lives of people, and it improves the environment. I think that the benefits we have talked about today are clear, but there are benefits in addition to that. And so I think that having animal welfare embedded and incorporated into our understanding of systems and our systems approaches for collecting information, evaluation, and research are going to only strengthen these ties and associations that we can see examples of, but need more evidence of.
Beautifully said. And with that, and given we're beyond our time limit, we will close. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the speakers. You did an amazing job, very inspiring. Gave us some homework.